Imagine sitting in a busy diner, enjoying your meal, when suddenly, a small act of kindness puts an entire room on pause. That's exactly what happened when a father asked if he could take leftovers for his daughter, and the response from a mysterious biker left everyone silent. Today, I want to explore how a single moment can reveal so much about humanity, compassion, and respect. This hook works because it paints a vivid scene, sparks curiosity, and emotionally engages your audience right away. It was just another ordinary afternoon in a small town diner, the kind of place where time seems to slow down and the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixes with the subtle aroma of sizzling bacon and pancakes. The clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional laugh of a patron or the ding of the bell over the entrance as a new customer walked in. This diner, with its checkered floors and cozy booths, had the charm of familiarity. It was the sort of place where everyone knew your name, or at least the type of stories you carried with you. At a corner booth near the window sat a man in his mid-30s, his hair slightly disabled from a long day of work, and across from him, a little girl of about 7, her eyes wide with curiosity and innocence. She clutched a small, worn-out backpack, and her tiny fingers tapped rhythmically against the table, betraying her impatience. This was no glamorous scene. There were no flashy cars in the parking lot, no extravagant meals being served. Just a father and daughter sharing a simple meal, navigating the ordinary routines of life with love and care. The father, wearing a plain jacket and work boots, had the air of someone who carried responsibility heavily, but also lightly, because the weight of life seemed to soften when he was around his daughter. His eyes, though tired, sparkled when he looked at her, a look full of tenderness and silent promises that no matter the hardships of the world outside, he would do his best to protect her, to provide for her, to make her laugh even in the smallest ways. The little girl, sensing the comfort of his presence, smiled shyly, twirling a strand of her hair as she looked out the window at the quiet street outside, watching the occasional passerby or delivery truck rumble by. The diner itself was alive in its own way. Waitresses moved between tables with practiced efficiency, their arms balancing trays laden with steaming plates of eggs, toast, and pancakes dripping with syrup. The jukebox in the corner played soft country tunes, blending into the chatter and laughter of the patrons, creating a soundtrack that felt both ordinary and intimate. There was a sense of community in the air, strangers sharing tables during busy hours, neighbors exchanging friendly nods, and the kind of camaraderie that comes from spending countless afternoons in the same place. And then there was the group at the next table. One man in particular stood out, a biker, broad-shouldered and imposing, dressed in worn leather and denim, with tattoos creeping up his arms and a look in his eyes that commanded attention. He sipped his coffee silently, his presence alone enough to make people glance over, curious or cautious. But he wasn't actively seeking attention. There was a calm confidence about him, as if he belonged to a different world yet was content just to observe the small dramas and joys of the diner. As the father prepared to speak, the moment seemed to stretch in time. He pushed his plate slightly aside, glanced down at the napkin in front of him, and then at his daughter, who was nibbling on a piece of toast. The simple act of asking for something, a seemingly trivial request, suddenly felt monumental in the context of the room. It was more than just asking for food. It was a small plea wrapped in humility and care, a demonstration of love that could resonate beyond the boundaries of this ordinary diner. In this scene, every detail mattered. The clinking of silverware against plates, the soft hiss of the coffee machine, the faint smell of sugar and syrup lingering in the air. It all contributed to a sense of realism, drawing the audience in. We could almost see the way sunlight streamed through the windows, casting patterns on the worn wooden floor, or hear the gentle squeak of a booth as someone shifted in their seat. These sensory details make the audience feel like they are right there, part of the moment, sharing in the anticipation of what would happen next. But beyond the sensory richness, there was something more profound at play. This wasn't just a diner, and these weren't just ordinary people having an ordinary lunch. It was a microcosm of life itself, full of quiet struggles, simple joys, fleeting tensions, and the unexpected moments that could leave a lasting impression. The father and daughter represented love in its purest, most unassuming form, the everyday acts of care and concern that often go unnoticed but carry immense significance. The biker, with his silent, observant demeanor, represented the unpredictability of human response, the reality that people often defy our expectations in ways that can surprise, teach, or even humble us. In this ordinary diner on an ordinary day, the stage was set for an extraordinary moment. The combination of setting, characters, and atmosphere created a tension that was almost tangible. The audience, whether in the diner itself or in our imaginations, could feel the quiet anticipation building, the collective pause before something remarkable happened. And in that stillness, we are reminded that sometimes it's the smallest gestures, the simplest words, and the most unassuming moments that can have the power to touch hearts, change perspectives, and leave an entire room silent in awe. The moment had arrived. After a quiet pause, the father's gaze shifted from his daughter to the plate of food in front of him. He had eaten most of his meal, leaving just enough that he could have asked for a to-go box. But this wasn't about convenience. This was about love, a quiet, unspoken devotion to someone who depended entirely on him. The little girl, his daughter, had spent the afternoon playing with her hands around the rim of her glass, occasionally glancing up at him, her eyes filled with curiosity and hope. He cleared his throat softly, almost as if he were apologizing for the audacity of his words. "Excuse me," he began, his voice low but steady. "Would it be all right if I took the leftovers for my daughter?" The words themselves were simple, unremarkable, almost mundane, but the weight behind them was anything but ordinary. He wasn't asking for free food out of entitlement. He wasn't demanding attention or sympathy. He was asking for something small, something practical, something that mattered deeply to him, because it would provide his daughter with a simple pleasure, a warm meal she could enjoy later, when he wasn't able to cook or when circumstances made it impossible for him to prepare a fresh plate. The diners around him paused, many subtly, others openly. Conversations dwindled into silence, a curious awareness settling over the room. People glanced at the father, at the little girl, and then at each other, sensing that something significant was about to unfold in the most ordinary of places. There was a strange beauty in this moment, a quiet tension that drew everyone in, even those who had never met the father or his daughter. His request was humble, framed in politeness and care. He didn't push or insist, he didn't try to justify his request. Instead, he spoke with an honesty and transparency that is rare in a world where people often feel compelled to hide their struggles or their needs. There was a vulnerability in him, yes, but not a weakness. It was the kind of vulnerability that commands respect. The courage to ask for help when it's needed, not for yourself, but for someone else. And then there was the little girl, sitting quietly across from him, her small hand clutching the edge of the table. She didn't interrupt, didn't fidget impatiently. She simply watched, her wide eyes reflecting trust and admiration. To her, her father was a figure of strength and reliability, someone who would always provide, always protect, even in moments of quiet uncertainty. And in that instant, she had no idea that the simple words he spoke would ripple far beyond their corner of the diner. The father's words also revealed the everyday realities of life for many people. For some, asking for leftovers isn't a question of charity. It's about managing resources, making sure no food is wasted, ensuring a child goes to bed with something in their stomach. Yet there was no sense of shame or desperation in his request. Instead, there was dignity and authenticity that was almost palpable. It reminded everyone listening that compassion and practicality often coexist in ways we don't notice, and that small acts of care can be profound. Even the physical setting contributed to the tension. The diner, with its constant background noise, the clinking of plates, the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional laugh, suddenly felt quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath. Patrons shifted in their seats, instinctively aware that they were witnessing a real human interaction, raw and unscripted. Some faces softened with empathy, others furrowed in curiosity, wondering what the response might be. But all felt the invisible pull of this father's quiet courage. The request itself was more than just a logistical question. It was a window into the father's character. Here was a man who thought first of his child, who weighed every word he spoke with care, and who understood that love is often expressed in the small, unseen moments. The diner became more than just a place to eat. It became a stage for human connection, a setting where everyday morality and empathy were put on display without fanfare or grand gestures. In many ways, this request transcended the immediate situation. It highlighted the beauty of simple, sincere communication. The father didn't embellish, didn't plead, and didn't dramatize. He spoke with clarity, respect, and a focus on his daughter's well-being. In doing so, he reminded everyone present, and anyone imagining the scene, that integrity and love often manifest in the smallest, quietest ways. meal, a polite question, a simple "may I?" These tiny gestures can carry enormous meaning. As he finished speaking, the father's eyes returned to his daughter's. She offered a soft smile, barely perceptible, but enough to convey her understanding. She knew that her father was doing his best, that he cared deeply for her, and that sometimes life's most important lessons come wrapped in ordinary moments like this. And somewhere in that diner, in that suspended moment, it became clear that the question wasn't just about food. It was about humanity, about empathy, about the ways we show care and consideration for those we love. Even without a reply, without knowing how the biker or anyone else would respond, the act of asking was itself transformative. It commanded attention, created emotional tension, and revealed the subtle power of humility and love. The father's request was a gentle reminder that, often, the most profound interactions are not the ones accompanied by fanfare, but the ones that quietly demand our attention and compassion. The diner had settled into a quiet rhythm once more, the gentle hum of conversations and the clinking of cutlery creating a familiar background. But the moment the father finished asking, "Can I take the leftovers for my daughter?" the air seemed to shift. It wasn't a dramatic shift. There were no gasps or exclamations, but something subtle, almost imperceptible, made the entire room pause. Eyes instinctively drifted toward the corner table, where the biker sat, his broad frame relaxed against the worn leather booth. At first glance, he was the kind of figure you'd expect to avoid trouble with. A man who seemed larger than life, a walking embodiment of rugged independence. His leather jacket was worn, the patches faded from years of rides and adventures. Tattoos peeked from under his sleeves, telling stories of past experiences, of roads traveled and battles fought. His dark sunglasses reflected the light overhead, hiding his eyes and, in a way, keeping his thoughts private. Patrons had often glanced at him with a mixture of curiosity and unease. After all, appearances have power. They can intimidate, inspire, or alienate. But appearances, as the diner was about to witness, could also deceive. The father's words had barely finished when the biker's hand paused mid-motion, holding a fork as if suspended in time. For a long moment, he simply looked at the father, looked at the little girl, and then around the diner, as if taking in the weight of the moment. No one could read his expression, hidden behind the sunglasses, but something in his posture suggested focused attention, a rare mindfulness that cut through the hum of everyday life. The atmosphere thickened, conversations dimmed, and even the clatter of dishes seemed softer. And then, slowly, the biker's eyes, now visible as he lowered the glasses, met the father's. There was no judgment in his gaze, no trace of scorn or dismissal. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition of the man's intent and his vulnerability. It was the kind of understanding that doesn't need words, the kind that communicates respect through presence alone. The diner, a space filled with ordinary routines, suddenly became something extraordinary, a stage where human dignity and empathy were on display. The biker's reaction was subtle yet powerful. He leaned back slightly, a soft, almost imperceptible nod accompanying the movement. It wasn't a theatrical gesture. It was deliberate in its simplicity. In that single motion, he conveyed acceptance, a silent message that the father's request was not only reasonable but honorable. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension giving way to a profound stillness. It was the kind of moment that defies explanation, a silent act speaking volumes, leaving onlookers suspended between curiosity, admiration, and awe. What made this reaction remarkable wasn't just that it was unexpected. It was the contrast between perception and reality. Here was a man who, by appearance alone, might be labeled intimidating, perhaps even unapproachable. Yet his actions revealed the opposite: an innate empathy, a deep respect for the human experience. In that quiet acknowledgement, he demonstrated that kindness is not defined by looks or societal labels. It is defined by heart, by intention, and by the courage to act without expecting recognition. Other diners, who had initially glanced at the father with mild curiosity or even indifference, began to feel the subtle weight of this interaction. They watched as the biker's posture softened further, a small, encouraging smile forming at the corners of his mouth. No words were spoken, yet the message was clear: he understood. And in that understanding there was validation. Validation of the father's love, his care, and his courage in asking. It was a reminder that empathy often comes not from grand gestures, but from quiet recognition, from acknowledging the humanity in someone else. The little girl, unaware of the social implications, simply smiled at her father. But the father noticed. He noticed the calm, reassuring presence of the biker. the way it made him feel seen and respected without judgment. And in that instant, the father understood something profound. Moments like these, seemingly insignificant to outsiders, carry immense weight in the hearts of those directly involved. They are moments that affirm our faith in human decency, that remind us the world is not always as harsh or indifferent as it seems. Even as the diner gradually returned to its usual rhythm, the waitresses moving busily between tables, the soft hum of chatter resuming, the memory of that pause lingered. It was a silence that spoke louder than any words could, a pause that communicated recognition, respect, and the subtle, transformative power of kindness. The biker, by choosing to respond not with noise, but with stillness and understanding, had demonstrated that sometimes the loudest statements are made in quiet, measured actions. In essence, the biker's reaction was more than just a response to a request for leftovers. It was a lesson in human behavior, a reminder that empathy often emerges from unexpected sources, and that our assumptions about people are frequently challenged by the reality of their actions. The diner had become a classroom, teaching a lesson in humility, patience, and the profound impact of silent support. And for those who witnessed it, whether the patrons, the father, or the daughter, the memory of that reaction would linger, a testament to the fact that even in everyday life, extraordinary moments of connection can occur when we least expect them. In the quiet aftermath of the biker's subtle, yet powerful acknowledgement, the diner seemed to hum with a different energy. Conversations resumed, plates were cleared, and the jukebox played its soft tunes. But for those paying attention, something had changed. That single moment, the father's humble request and the biker's silent approval, had created a ripple, invisible but undeniable, through the space. It was a reminder that kindness, even in its smallest forms, has a power that transcends the ordinary, leaving lasting impressions that words alone cannot convey. Kindness, as demonstrated in that moment, is rarely about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It is often quiet, understated, and simple. A polite yes to a small request, a nod of understanding, a gentle smile. These can have an impact far greater than we imagine. In the case of the diner, it wasn't charity that was at play. It wasn't about giving or receiving something material. It was about empathy, recognition, and respect. The biker's acknowledgement validated the father's love and effort, reinforcing that the everyday acts of care we show our loved ones are meaningful, recognized, and respected, even by strangers. The father's action, humble as it was, carried a profound message. He demonstrated that love often shows itself in quiet, practical ways, rather than in ostentatious displays. By simply asking to take leftovers for his daughter, he illustrated the essence of parental love: attentiveness, consideration, and prioritizing someone else's well-being above one's own comfort or pride. For anyone observing, it was a lesson in how small, intentional acts can ripple outward, affecting not only those directly involved but everyone who witnesses them. What made the lesson even more compelling was its universality. Kindness is not constrained by wealth, status, or appearance. In that diner, the father was an ordinary man, the daughter an ordinary child, and the biker an imposing figure by societal standards. Yet their interaction transcended these labels. The father's humility, the daughter's innocence, and the biker's silent empathy combined to create a tableau of humanity at its best. It was a reminder that every act of kindness, no matter how seemingly insignificant, carries weight and meaning. The moment also highlighted the unexpected ways kindness can manifest. The biker, a man who might initially be judged as intimidating or unapproachable, became the vessel of compassion in that story. His response, quiet and deliberate, demonstrated that empathy does not always come in the forms we expect. We often assume kindness will be loud, obvious, or performative, but true empathy is subtle. It shows up in attentive listening, in the patience to understand someone else's perspective, and in the courage to act without seeking recognition. This is the lesson the diner, and by extension life, teaches. Compassion is most powerful when it is authentic, unassuming, and directed without expectation. For the patrons who witnessed the scene, the impact was immediate, even if silent. Eyes met, small smiles were exchanged, and a sense of shared understanding passed among strangers. In that brief, unspoken communication, people were reminded that human connection is nurtured through awareness, respect, and thoughtfulness. It is easy to move through daily life ignoring the struggles and triumphs of others. But moments like this compel us to pause, observe, and internalize the profound effect of caring, even in the smallest of ways. Moreover, this incident reminds us that kindness is not transactional. The father did not ask for leftovers to receive praise. The biker did not nod to gain favor or acknowledgement. Each acted in alignment with their values and empathy. There was no expectation, only understanding. This purity of action is what makes kindness so impactful. It cannot be measured in tangible rewards. Its true value lies in its effect on hearts and minds. Those observing, even in a brief instant, are touched and changed. They remember, reflect, and are inspired to act in ways that honor the human spirit. The story also teaches that kindness often inspires further kindness. The ripple effect, subtle yet powerful, does not end in the moment it occurs. One act of compassion can influence others, creating a chain reaction of understanding and empathy. The patrons of the diner, the father, the daughter, and the biker, all participants in this simple act, carry the lesson beyond the walls of that diner. It might influence the next polite gesture, the next thoughtful action, or the next instance where someone chooses empathy over indifference. Kindness, when observed and internalized, becomes contagious in the most beautiful way. Finally, the story underscores the role of awareness in the practice of kindness. The father recognized a need for his daughter. The biker recognized the father's intent. Both acted consciously, thoughtfully, and intentionally. Kindness is not accidental. It requires observation, reflection, and a willingness to act. In a world where distractions abound and human connections can feel fleeting, the diner scene serves as a powerful reminder that attention, consideration, and conscious empathy are the foundation of meaningful acts. In this way, the lesson is clear: the small, deliberate acts of love and kindness in everyday life are powerful. They can transform ordinary spaces into arenas of humanity, create moments that linger in memory, and remind us that every individual has the capacity to uplift, support, and inspire. The father's request, the daughter's trust, and the biker's silent acknowledgement combine to create a timeless lesson. A story of how kindness, when genuine, leaves an indelible mark not just on the people involved, but on all who witness it. In the moments following the biker's subtle acknowledgement, the diner seemed to hum with a quiet, reflective energy. Patrons resumed their conversations, but something had shifted. An invisible thread of awareness had woven itself into the atmosphere. That single act of understanding, of seeing and validating another person's need, was not just an isolated moment. It was a demonstration of the profound power of empathy, the ability to step into someone else's world, even briefly, and recognize their humanity. Empathy, in its purest form, is a transformative skill. It allows us to feel alongside others, to sense their joys, their fears, and their struggles, and to respond in a manner that is thoughtful and compassionate. The father, in asking for leftovers, demonstrated his own empathy as a parent. He recognized his daughter's needs, her hunger, and her desire for comfort. But it was the biker's reaction that revealed empathy in a way that transcended social boundaries. By acknowledging the father's request without judgment or condescension, the biker exemplified how true empathy operates. It is attentive, deliberate, and deeply human. What makes empathy so powerful is its ability to create connection across differences. In the diner, the father and biker could not have been more different on the surface. One was a humble, hardworking man, concerned only with providing for his child. The other was a rugged figure, intimidating in appearance, defined by the leather, tattoos, and solitude often associated with bikers. Yet empathy erased these superficial distinctions. The biker's recognition of the father's intentions bridged the gap between them, turning strangers into participants in a shared human experience. This moment reminds us that empathy does not require similarity. It requires openness, attention, and the willingness to understand. Empathy also has the power to silence judgment. In many situations, people rush to evaluate others based on appearance, assumptions, or preconceived notions. In the diner, it would have been easy to misjudge the biker as stern, harsh, or unapproachable. Yet in choosing to respond with quiet acknowledgement rather than critique, he dismantled assumptions in a single motion. This demonstrates a crucial lesson. Empathy allows us to suspend judgment, to prioritize understanding over evaluation, and to see the essence of a person rather than the surface details. In doing so, it fosters respect and cultivates an environment where genuine human connection can flourish. The father, too, displayed empathy in a different, but equally significant way. His request, though humble, reflected his sensitivity to his daughter's needs and feelings. He anticipated her joy at having the leftovers for later, understanding that small gestures can carry great emotional weight for a child. In this way, empathy becomes an active practice, not just a feeling. It requires forethought, reflection, and a willingness to act in ways that uplift others. The father's words, carefully chosen and delivered with care, exemplified empathy as action, reminding us that understanding alone is insufficient without the willingness to respond thoughtfully. Empathy also creates ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate interaction. When the biker recognized the father's intentions, he didn't just affirm the father, he impacted everyone in the diner who witnessed the exchange. Silent observers could sense the mutual respect and understanding, and in that sensing, they were prompted to reflect on their own capacity for empathy. Empathy, when demonstrated authentically, is contagious. It encourages others to slow down, to notice the needs of those around them, and to respond with kindness rather than indifference. The diner became a microcosm for this dynamic, showing how one mindful act can inspire awareness and compassion in an entire community. Moreover, empathy teaches humility and perspective. In observing the father's humble request and the biker's understanding reaction, the diner's patrons were reminded that everyone has a story. Challenges, struggles, and responsibilities that are often invisible to the outside world. The biker's silence, paired with his acknowledgement, communicated recognition without intrusion. He validated the father's experience while maintaining dignity for both parties. This is the essence of empathy, seeing another's reality without judgment, respecting their perspective, and responding in a manner that honors their humanity. In addition, empathy strengthens the bonds of trust. Even in a brief encounter like this, the father likely felt a sense of reassurance, a quiet affirmation that the world, at least in this moment, was capable of understanding and respect. Trust is built on the foundation of being seen and heard, of being met with compassion rather than indifference. The biker's response, though silent, conveyed this message powerfully that attentiveness and recognition can establish profound connections, even without words. Finally, the story of the diner demonstrates that empathy is not reserved for grand acts of heroism. It exists in ordinary moments, in small gestures, in simple acknowledgments of someone else's needs. It is not always dramatic or visible, but its effects are deeply transformative. The father, the daughter, the biker, and even the observing patrons were all touched by this interaction, and each carried the lesson forward in their own way. Empathy, at its core, reminds us that we are all part of a shared human experience, capable of both giving and receiving understanding, respect, and care. As the scene in the diner continued to settle, the echoes of that brief interaction lingered, almost like a soft vibration through the air. The father's quiet request, the little girl's innocent anticipation, and the biker's subtle acknowledgement had created more than just a story for those present. They had created a lesson that extended far beyond the walls of the diner. In reflecting on this moment, it becomes clear that acts of kindness, empathy, and understanding are not merely moral ideals, they are practical, powerful tools that shape our relationships, our communities, and even our own character. When we pause to reflect, we see that every detail in that exchange carries significance. The father's humility demonstrated that love is not measured in grand gestures, but in thoughtful consideration of the needs of those we care for. His act of asking for leftovers was small in scale but immense in meaning. It was a tangible demonstration of devotion, attentiveness, and responsibility. In our own lives, we may overlook the impact of these everyday acts of love and care. Yet it is precisely in these ordinary moments that extraordinary connections are formed, quietly influencing hearts and leaving lasting impressions. The biker's response reinforces this lesson. Through a subtle nod, a lowered gaze, or a soft smile, he communicated understanding without the need for words. His silence spoke volumes, reminding us that recognition, respect, and validation do not always require dramatic displays. They can exist in quiet, intentional actions. In observing his reaction, we are reminded that empathy often works best when it is understated and sincere. The world is filled with moments where judgment, criticism, or apathy could easily dominate, but choosing awareness and understanding transforms ordinary situations into profound experiences. For the little girl, the impact was perhaps invisible in its complexity, but deeply felt in its warmth. She was witnessing a moment in which her father's love was recognized and affirmed by someone outside their family, a stranger who, in a few gestures, conveyed trust and acknowledgement. This reinforces the idea that empathy and kindness are not just transactional, they are affirmations of human dignity. We are reminded that when someone takes the time to understand or validate us, even in small ways, it strengthens our sense of belonging and worth. Reflecting on the diners who witnessed the exchange, one can see how the power of a single act radiates outward. Each person present became part of the story, either consciously or subconsciously absorbing the lesson of humility, empathy, and care. Moments like these remind us that human connections are not limited to family, friends, or acquaintances. They can arise spontaneously, in shared spaces or through seemingly minor interactions. Every environment we inhabit presents opportunities to engage in acts of kindness, to acknowledge others, and to reflect empathy, even when no one is watching. From a broader perspective, this story underscores a critical truth: empathy and kindness are transformative forces precisely because they are simple. They do not require wealth, status, or power. They do not demand elaborate planning or heroic courage. They require attentiveness, humility, and the willingness to act thoughtfully. In our fast-paced world, it can be easy to overlook the quiet, meaningful opportunities for connection that appear daily. The diner scene reminds us to notice them, to pause, to observe, and to engage consciously. Small acts like offering a smile, listening attentively, or acknowledging someone's efforts can have ripple effects far beyond our immediate perception. Moreover, this interaction calls us to a practical action, to examine our own lives and consider how we respond to the needs of others. Do we notice the quiet gestures of struggle around us? Do we respond with empathy or indifference? The story encourages reflection, urging us to cultivate awareness in our daily routines and relationships. Empathy is not passive, it requires attention and intentionality. By choosing to act thoughtfully, to validate another person's experience, or to support someone in a small but meaningful way, we participate in a cycle of kindness that strengthens the social fabric of our communities. The diner also highlights an important truth about courage. It takes courage to be vulnerable, as the father was, and it takes courage to respond with kindness, as the biker did. Vulnerability and empathy often go hand in hand. They are acts of bravery in a world that frequently rewards self-interest and detachment. In acknowledging others, in stepping outside our assumptions and taking a moment to care, we model behavior that inspires and uplifts. These actions, though subtle, can resonate for years, reminding all involved that the world is capable of compassion, even in unexpected places. Finally, the lesson extends to each of us as observers, participants, or potential witnesses to similar moments in our lives. We are called to be active participants in the human experience, to respond with attentiveness, to act with intentional kindness, and to embrace empathy not as an occasional practice, but as a guiding principle. When we approach daily interactions with this mindset, we create opportunities for connection, validation, and understanding, transforming ordinary moments into extraordinary human experiences. In essence, the story of the diner, the father, his daughter, and the biker is more than just a tale of leftover food. It is a microcosm of human morality, empathy, and the ripple effect of small acts of love. It challenges us to reflect, to notice, and to act consciously in our own lives. The moment, frozen in time yet lasting in impact, serves as a powerful reminder that kindness and empathy, when exercised sincerely, can resonate far beyond the initial act, leaving silent yet profound impressions that shape hearts and communities alike. So, what can we take away from a simple question about leftovers? It's that even the smallest act, asking for a meal, offering a nod of understanding, or simply pausing to recognize another person's need, can create ripples far beyond what we see. The father's love, the daughter's innocence, and the biker's quiet empathy remind us that humanity thrives in these small moments. Every day, we encounter opportunities to act with kindness, to listen with empathy, and to make a difference without fanfare. Sometimes it's as simple as noticing someone's struggle, acknowledging their effort, or giving them the space to be human. These moments don't require heroism, they require heart. So the next time you see a small act of humility, or a chance to help without expectation, remember the diner, the father, and the biker. Let it inspire you to pause, to care, and to act. Because in a world that moves so fast, it is often the quiet, thoughtful gestures, the ones we almost overlook, that have the power to leave the room, and the world, silent in awe.